All right. And welcome back, you guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I am your host, Corey Hageman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. First up, you guys who are subscribed, who've rated, reviewed the show, I appreciate it. I just want to let you know it helps out so much. And those of you who are new to the channel, if you are interested in getting push notifications, assuming that you have those set up, straight to your phone when a new episode or new video drops live, be sure to hit that bell button. That will send you a direct alert. And within that, you'll see 4 solo episodes coming out every Monday. You'll see 2 guest episodes a month coming out bi-weekly, and then 2 of the, I would say, more medium length, but they're still, lately, guys, they've been 15 to 20 minutes long. If you caught the first one, that was like the starting dose of every performance enhancing drug, or just about every one. Second one was 3 signs of muscle gain. 3 signs that the weight you're gaining is fat, not muscle. Both received great responses. So I'm going to keep it rolling. You guys seem to like this new style of content. And if you have any ideas for content, or there are things that you're like, hey, I've combed through all your videos, I've gone through your podcast, and I'm not seeing the specific topic, let me know in the comments below. That is how I am inspired in order to know what kind of videos to create in the future. So with all that being said, we are going to dive right in. So yes, for a lot of y'all listening to this, you are interested in bettering your fitness, whether that resemble losing a little bit of fat, building a little bit of muscle. I know it can be challenging and even frustrating when you feel like the best thing you can do right now is to just dig in and go harder and, just embrace the strain of the phase that you're currently in. But sometimes the best move is stopping the diet, coming out of the deficit. And today I'm walking you through 3 kinds of instances, 3 types of people sort of, in my opinion, need to end that perpetual diet cycle. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll see why staying in a deficit isn't always the answer, especially if you want real physique progress or better mental and physical health outcomes. All right, and person number 1, you want better tie-ins, but you really just need more muscle. Now, this is something that I've seen and experienced firsthand myself. I was that individual who was convinced that I could just out diet a lack of muscularity. Several of my preps, once I was able to really expose myself to stage condition, I was just like, oh, sick. Okay, this is what we need to do. I just need to keep getting leaner. And this isn't, I would say, that uncommon in today's climate, specifically within the bikini division. Oftentimes the individual thinks if I just stay lean, eventually my glutes will pop. Maybe there's an issue with how I'm training. Maybe there's an issue with my diet, but the answer is within getting leaner. Now, pause. The reality is you will probably have to get to a level of discomfort in order to get tie-ins to show, because if that isn't the case, that means you have so much glute projection in tie-in that you are able to display it even at, let's say, moderate body fat levels. When I think of this, I think of different athletes across the years, but I think Maureen is a really good example of someone who she, don't get me wrong, she gets really lean, yes, and she has gotten crazy conditioned. But I think with her physique, she also encompasses so much muscularity that it's in a way allowed her to push back on some of that conditioning that other athletes do have to get, myself included, because the depth of that glute max and the way that it actually presents on her physique relative to the amount of body fat she has, it puts her in a position where it actually would be detrimental if she were to get too lean. It would actually impede the look and be a little more imbalanced. Now, you can pretty much diet yourself down to display even very small, very subtle tie-ins, which I've done this several times now, but the truth is there is a detriment to doing this. And if we're talking about a competitor, which is typically the case in this instance, you really have to consider the balance that you're sacrificing both top to bottom and then front to back. So whenever you lose that fullness, whenever you begin to over diet in order to get the bottom of your tie-ins to show, this is something that you can actually place worse for, and something that I have placed worse for in the past. And I know it can be really hard when you're in these contest prep states, when you're very dysmorphic with your physique, to just keep thinking like, if I get leaner, if I get smaller, this ultimately is going to make the physique look better. And you can get very tunnel vision. You can get tunnel vision when just like working towards having tie-in visibility. But I think this is where it can be really beneficial to have someone in your corner who can really like see you and zoom out and be like, hey, you could keep dieting and like, yes, this conditioning is impressive, but realistically, you're also going to be incurring a look that you're also going to be developing a look that is very imbalanced from a muscularity standpoint and from a conditioning standpoint that now doesn't really fit within the criteria. The truth is, to combat this problem, really to overcome the challenge of like not having that depth and progression, one of the best ways to go about that is just building more muscle. So building a physique that doesn't require you to get to extremely low body fat levels in order to get tie-in visibility. So if you look at any of the athletes who are performing well right now, they are displaying very dense, very projected tie-ins. And overall, there are individuals that are being judged and marked down for coming in too conditioned in the upper body, in the core, in the hamstrings. And these are really good clues and signs for us competitors to take into account when we're going about carving down our physique and figuring out how do we strike that really feminine balance of really good projection without being overly conditioned. So if you're someone who has gotten feedback that you're too conditioned, that you need more glutes, and you've also found that in the process of dieting down, the focus has been on creating visibility at the tie-in, this would be a good time to take a beat, maybe come out of the deficit and get into an intentional build where you can put some actual size on. And I'll say, under this umbrella, if you're also finding that you're having to pose so hard to compensate for a lack of muscularity, this is your second sign that you would benefit from having more muscle in your frame. And if it's specific to the glutes, I know that can be frustrating. It can be a bit of a commitment to be like, okay, I'm not going to diet. I'm not going to compete. I'm going to take this segmented amount of time and really commit to just growing. And listen, guys, I have been there. I've had moments where I've been very attached to a certain level of leanness, and I've compromised on going into a surplus and even gone into surpluses only to come back out because I got uncomfortable. In reality, the most progress that I've seen in my physique is taking time intentionally, not dieting, taking time spent in a very meaningful, intentional growth phase where the full focus, the sole purpose of this phase, it wasn't to just gain weight. It was to gain muscle. I can tell you that as a competitor, and having been a competitor for about 10 years now, if you are focused on bringing a competitive physique and you're really trying to showcase the best you, the current standard bikini requires a level of muscularity that, frankly, you're not going to just accidentally stumble upon, at least for most people. It might just take time and it might take multiple builds, but there's absolutely ways to drive more progress than a lot of people are doing. And if that's something that you're struggling with, or you're not really finding resolution, you don't have a good system in place, I can absolutely help you out with that. Links to coaching and consultations can be found in the description down below. Now, at the time of recording this, you'll have also seen a solo episode that came out where I am talking about recomping. And spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to that, tune out now. Essentially, I don't think that a lot of people are using this term correctly. I think what they're describing is a very intentional build where we're minimizing that fat gain relative to muscle gain. So we have a very high P ratio of muscle to fat, making it to where people are essentially looking like they're losing fat. It's just a matter of the ratio of muscle to fat that's being modified and changing over time that's giving this illusion that they've recomped. And that's exactly where I would recommend someone who is mentally really struggling with like the weight gain and accepting that they need to come out of a diet. That's what I would recommend they do, is not try to do both things at once. Definitely don't try to recomp because it's unlikely that it's actually going to work for you. But instead, approach a maintenance, establish what this intake is, and begin to shoot for a very mild surplus. It doesn't have to be much. It can be 150, 200 calories, and go into this phase with grace and very clear structure. And no, we're not talking about just gaining a bunch of fat. It's a controlled environment. It's a controlled build where you steadily increase calories enough to support muscle growth. And you do so in a way that allows you to really discern, is the weight that's coming on actually muscle or is it fat? But this is going to come with letting go of that comfortably always lean look for a bit. But I can tell you, in the long run, the first time you go through this is ultimately going to change how you view your physique and hopefully lead to some really stellar improvements compositionally. You got to understand that in a deficit, you're not going to build meaningful muscle. And if you're always chasing tie-ins, and that is the thing that's holding you back from performing better in the sport, from placing better, or from feeling better about your physique, the only way out is through. You can continue to diet, you can dwindle it down, but especially for the individual who is getting marked down because they're overly conditioned in their upper body, their core, or their hamstrings, or they're having to post so hard in a very unrealistic way in order to compensate for a lack of muscularity, you're pretty much stuck in that loop, and you're going to be until you break the cycle and you really commit yourself to putting on the size. So, person number 2, the one who struggles with adherence. They are not actually on plan. They try to be, but they're consistently failing. And instead of really recognizing that they're not making improvements and these instances aren't isolated, they just keep lowering calories. They keep trying to push the deficit even harder. And the reality is, I've been this person. I think a lot of us can say we've gone through spurts where we attempted to diet, but we're not as successful. And this person is the one who intentionally, perpetually tries to get leaner, but simply can't stick to what it's going to take. And maybe they do well for 3 to 4 days. Maybe they blow it over the weekend or on a trip, but they beat themselves up consistently. And they sometimes even set the calories unrealistically low after a binge or overfeeding period. Next time they fail again, and it's this vicious cycle that never ends. Sometimes you do just have to accept that your current environment or your mindset isn't set up for a successful diet. And I can tell you that last year I finished my build. I was clocking in at 152 and I was thick. I felt a little uncomfortable. And as much as I wanted to start dieting, I was convinced that, going through the holidays, I'll be able to have some kind of normalcy and regimen. But I wasn't very honest about what that would take in order to start to see fat loss occur, given the amount of social commitments I already had, given the amount of trips that I'd planned. And as much as I really wanted to get leaner at the time, I just didn't apply myself. I didn't do the things that I needed to do in order to drive fat loss. And sometimes it can be that simple. It can be as simple as I don't have the discipline at this point, given what I have on my plate. And at the time, I remember feeling really beat up. And I'm I really would like to see the scale weight go down. I feel like I am restricting in some capacity. But what I was missing is that I was having a lot of free meals and I was having a lot of untracked meals that, frankly, even the guesstimations were probably still off. And even then, what it was doing is I was having days where I was pretty low on food and I was doing a lot of cardio, but seemingly I would have just as many days, or realistically just as many calories that undid any kind of deficit that I was actually in. And to no surprise, the scale didn't move down that much. And even though it was frustrating and I felt like I really was trying because I was, in reality, the environment was so inconsistent and I wasn't willing to do the things that would ultimately lead to dietary success. And looking back, I am kind of glad that I still tried to have those lower days to balance out some of those higher days. Realistically, if I'd stayed at maintenance or even gone into a surplus, that probably would have led to a faster rate of gain. And I'm telling you, that wouldn't have been muscle. But what about for the individual who isn't dealing with external factors? They're not dealing with personal hangups or commitments to either travel or social events. Instead, they are struggling because from an adherence standpoint, they just don't have it in them. Now, I think in this case, instead of continuing to beat yourself up and setting these goals that, frankly, you have the proof that they're not realistic, what would be smarter is instead setting your calorie target or your macro target to whatever the minimum is that you can stick to. And for most people, this is going to be closer to maintenance. I think it's also important that during this time, you're not expecting to lose weight. I think having very clear expectations and going in, just being like, okay, I'm going to try to be consistent here on in. I'm going to try to eat according to these numbers. And if I'm slightly off, I will modify accordingly. But realistically, this is enough food that I should be able to stick to this without any kind of hiccups. I think this would lead people to far less frustration. Instead, I've been this person, I'm sure you have too, being halfway in, halfway out, you just end up feeling like a failure. And realistically, that dietary fatigue still accrues in the background, regardless of how much weight you lose or you don't lose. Here's what I want you to do. If you are constantly catching yourself where you're repeatedly blowing the diet and you're making excuses and you're always justified maybe in why you couldn't stick to it, I want you to evaluate your environment. I want you to evaluate your schedule and your mindset. And maybe it is holiday season and the best thing is to consider it a wash and know that in order to minimize fat gain, you might have to be in a diet because you're going to have so many inconsistencies. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you don't have to equate it to the holiday season. You don't have to equate it to travel. It can just simply be that you don't have it in you to maintain that consistency. And I think sometimes it's better to say, I'm just not in position to execute the way I know I need to. So instead, let's aim for maintenance until things calm down a little bit. I think especially post-show, it's important to be honest. It's important to really ask yourself, what is the best version of you and how can you show up each and every day? And it'd be great if that version of you is 100% adherent, but realistically, that might not be the case for a lot of you guys. I think in the case where you are experiencing overages or binges that are isolated, if you can work back and try to identify the root of the issue, this could be helpful in understanding what's causing this. And ultimately, if you understand the why, this can position you better to be more solution oriented and troubleshoot the actual issue. I can think back at one point where I was very timid and I was very hesitant to encourage people to lose at a pound a week or 1.5 pounds a week. And this really stemmed from this fear that that was going to be too aggressive and that they might experience metabolic damage, or it just might put them in a bad place in terms of their mental well-being. Now, what I didn't realize at the time when I approached fat loss this way for myself and for clients is that there is a component of expectation relative to dietary fatigue, relative to progress that is constantly clocking in the background. And something that I've heard repeatedly from clients that is a really bad feeling they have once they're into a diet is feeling like they've exercised a high degree of willpower and execution, yet they're not seeing it translate into their physique and or the scale weight. This is where I think it's really important to understand what capacity you have to commit to the phase you're in. But in a fat loss phase, strength is going to suffer, hormones are going to suffer, sex drive is going to suffer, and it's likely going to take away from other aspects of your life that hopefully bring you joy. So in the instance that you're kind of passively in a fat loss phase, but you're not really in a big enough fat loss phase to actually drive progress, yet that's the goal, this could be something to take a closer look at, because if you're not in a big enough deficit, you're not going to lose weight. And I think for a lot of people, this can begin to weigh on their self-belief. I know for myself, I struggled with this for years, thinking that I didn't have the discipline to be adherent. And largely, this stemmed from this perpetual cycle of being in these extreme diets, telling myself that if I wanted to see fat loss, I had to really restrict myself. Ultimately, not being able to stick to them, it just perpetuated this belief that, well, I'm not disciplined enough. If I had more discipline, I could continue to follow these very extreme protocols. And realistically, when I think back, I'm like, I was never in a position to succeed because I was putting myself, self-coached, putting myself in such great deficits that it was inevitable for me to go off track. I think whatever dietary approach you take, it needs to be somewhat sustainable. Because realistically, if you're following something very extreme, very unsustainable, you're going to be hyper focused on just ending that phase, getting through it, and getting back to your scheduled programming, which for a lot of people is what puts them in the position from a body composition standpoint that they're now in. Instead of reacting to binges and overages by lowering your food the next day, doing more cardio, take a step back and really look at if it makes sense for you to be in a deficit period. That cycle that is inherently very self-destructive, it damages your relationship with your body, with your self-image, with your self-belief, and probably with food as well. Be mature enough to say, you know what, now is not the right time to diet. I can't commit to it, and I want to be able to give it 100% because I only want to spend the necessary amount of time in a fat loss phase that I have to. Instead, save the cut when your environment and your mindset are completely aligned. And the third person who needs to stop dieting is the person who is hyper-focused on staying too lean. Now, this person is already near or below a healthy body fat for physiological function. And this might be someone who's been dieting for a long period of time. It might be someone who's naturally smaller and tries to push even leaner for no real reason, no real goal. Now, in the case that you're a bodybuilder and you have a bodybuilding show and you're getting ready for it, that's one thing. There is a deadline. There's a point in which you are going to come out of it, hopefully. But if you're just staying extremely lean year-round with no goal in sight, there are some pretty meaningful health risks that you're exposing yourself to. Not to mention regressions in training performance as well as mental burnout. Listen, we glorify low body fats in fitness culture without really paying mind to, is this healthy for the individual? But it's not always healthy and it's not always beneficial. And some people might handle it fine, but for many, this is going to objectively have effects on their hormonal function. So when we look at women, like this can manifest as losing your cycle. Men might even experience low testosterone if body fat is too low and they're not using exogenous testosterone. Now, another issue we see, and this is going to be applicable to both genders, is a performance drop. If you're so lean that every training session you feel depleted and you can't push strength, you can't push performance, you have to understand that there is eventually going to be a point where this translates to how you look. And if you're unable to maintain performance, sure, you can organize your training differently or you can modify it in a way to where you're doing more volume. But realistically, there is a ceiling. And the more that you push up or even past this ceiling, the greater risk of injury you expose yourself to. And let me just say, like, there's two ends of the spectrum. There's the individual that knows that they're too lean. They are just simply afraid of letting it go. They're unable to gain weight because mentally they're like, I need to white knuckle this. I need to hold on to this body fat. But they're very much aware that this is a detriment. They're aware of the sensations, and their body is sending them very real signals that they need to gain weight and they need to eat more. Now, the other end of the spectrum is the individual who's a little bit in denial, who thinks that they can just keep pushing, who thinks that the food fixation is normal, who thinks that the overarching fatigue that they experience pretty much every day and the hunger pains are just a part of the process. And I would say, yes, like generally these are expected symptoms of being at a low body fat. But for this other end of the spectrum, we have to see that this individual doesn't understand the detriment to the physique that they're posing by putting themselves or by maintaining this body fat level for so long. Depending on where the individual is in terms of their awareness and their buy-in to this necessity to gain body fat, this is ultimately going to dictate how you approach this, I guess, coming from the POV that you are offering solicited advice, or you are, someone that they've asked input for, whether that be a coach or a trusted friend. And in this case, if they are aware that body fat is too low, but they're very anxious about gaining weight, this is something that I think education can serve a really important role in. So explaining how overall, if their goal is to have a really rockin' physique and like they want to make improvements in their body composition, it's very difficult to do this when you're at low body fat percentages, just from the notion that like you're not going to be able to progress training performance. So if the individual needs more muscle, it's probably a good idea to get them out of this danger zone. It's probably best if they come up closer to a maintenance. And what you have to realize is that even at maintenance, even when you're starting in a low body fat, if you're not eating in a surplus, the weight isn't going to come on. So depending on how active this individual is, depending on what their non-exercise activity is like, they might be able to get away with eating a lot more food than they even realize. And I think this is incredibly important if the individual is struggling with adherence, if they're struggling with food fixation, if overall just being super lean is impacting their ability to have social freedom and overall is generating more stress. So I think that's an option if that is you, or if that's someone you know. You just like walking them through like, hey, if your goal is to look better and to improve your physique, I think getting really clear on what their goal is helpful. But if that is your goal, if you are listening to this and you're like, I'm too fucking lean, but I'm just like nervous about gaining weight, understand that like you aren't going to progress your physique in the state that you're in. And that's really, I guess, a good way to punctuate that part of it. Now, what about for the individual who's getting ready for a competition? I mean, I kind of walk them through the same mindset and really appraisal and look at, okay, we're getting ready for this show, but post-show, we should see body fat come up pretty significantly in those first 4 to 6 weeks, not necessarily to balloon up, not to gain a bunch of body fat, but to put you in a position where you can begin to recoup and recover hormonally, because realistically, you only got this lean to get on stage. And if we maintain this, this is an asset if the goal is to get on stage. But if the goal is to get into a build, then we need to move you and transition you really out of this phase systematically. And I think a lot of people, this is where they get it wrong. They think that they need to reverse out very slowly. But when we're talking about someone who's at such a low body fat percentage and is being impacted on a regular basis from a hormonal standpoint, but overall like global standpoint, systemic standpoint, we do need to ensure that they are not sitting here for the sake of sitting in this state. And for this individual, it might be worth considering, why are you staying so lean? And if it's for competition, great. Once the competition's over, what is your plan to transition out of this? Do you have targets at points that you're going to try to hit in terms of body weight, or really just physically a look that will allow you to be more productive and feel a little better? But if there's no compelling reason and you're feeling really run down or physically very compromised, raise your calories slightly and just let your body recover. And listen, there isn't a single body fat cutoff that I can declare for everyone, but you know when it's messing with your health and with your relationships. And if you're unclear about that on the health side, this is something that I would definitely recommend getting labs done in the case that someone is convinced that hormonally they are healthy. And even more specifically for a female athlete, I would want to look at whether or not they're ovulating and get that confirmation on lab work. So it's not as simple as just getting estradiol and progesterone checked and seeing that they're within range. We also need to time them accordingly as to whether or not it's around a time that these hormones should be higher. And if you're not, and we've timed things correctly, this is really good evidence and proof for the individual or for yourself to indicate that, hey, your body has decided that all non-critical functions can go, which sadly, reproduction is a non-critical function when in severe caloric deficits. All right, so to recap, 3 people, if you're listening to this, that I believe should stop dieting right now. The person who needs more muscle and is trying to compensate with conditioning, just go into the intentional growth phase. Find a program that allows you to gain, and seemingly it's probably going to be uncomfortable, but this is going to make your next fat loss phase that much more rewarding. Number 2, the dieter who keeps failing, whether that be because their environment, intrinsically, there are aspects that just make it hard for them to be adherent, or their schedule is preventing them from executing at the level that they want to. Real adherence, that's what we need in a fat loss phase. And if you're unable to execute at that level, this is going to ultimately lead to frustration and self-blame. So I would take a step back, get really honest with yourself, consider what aspects are making it hard for you to adhere, consider whether that is actually weighing on you at this point in the diet, or if you're very happy with the progress. But realistically, in the case that you're not able to execute at a higher level, just call it. Just decide that this is something that you're going to come back to when you have more bandwidth and you're able to execute at the level that you want to. And number 3, the person who is already too lean. And maybe the goal isn't necessarily to get leaner. Maybe it's just to maintain this super low body fat, or maybe you are trying to get leaner, but really there's no purpose. There's no set deadline, and you are risking your health. You are potentially seeing regressions in your physique. Your hormones aren't necessarily in the best place, and your mental well-being is taking a hit. In all of these scenarios, continuing dieting, continuing in the deficit isn't doing you any favors. And sometimes the big step forward is to accept you might be better off with more food and shifting to maintenance or even a slight surplus, but giving your body what it needs to thrive, whether that's actually more muscle or simply better days that you can function and be at your best, this might actually serve you better. And don't be afraid to step out of that dieting zone. If you do it right, you might find that there is an uptick in your overall health and in your physique. And a common question I want to follow up with, what if I only fail my diet on the weekends? Should I still stop dieting? This is one that I would say it is worth working on the skill of dieting. And if it's only on the weekends or only in specific environments, this can give you more data to essentially troubleshoot. And I would try to be really clear on what are the catalysts, what are the things that make you go off track. And maybe instead of eliminating them entirely, try to reduce them. So if the overages right now are just completely untracked days, both Saturday and Sunday, well, what if you were to do a tracked day, or what if you were to just track what you're already having when you're going untracked, to just get a better sense of how much you're actually eating. I think the awareness around this can really help, especially for individuals who aren't able to really discern like how many calories are in some of these untracked meals. Alternatively, you could even shift to higher days on the weekend so that you're still able to make some of these higher calorie meals work without technically feeling like you're going off plan. I think ultimately practicing and getting better at the skill of exercising discipline in these unconventional senses, I think that can help you get better at dieting and build more self-belief. But I think if it's only an issue 2 days out of the week, it's definitely worth the extra effort to figure out how you can tighten up those days. All right, question number 2. I'm not a competitor, but I like being really freaking lean. How do I know if it's harming me? So I would ask yourself regularly if your energy, mood, hormones, performance, if these are being negatively impacted, and if so, to what degree? If you're constantly fatigued, if you're having mood swings, if you and your partner are fighting on account of where you are intrinsically, and your lifts have stagnated, that's definitely a sign that it's impacting you. I would also consider your social life. And even if you're more of an introvert like me, if you're finding that you're avoiding very normal events to maintain the physique and it's weighing on your happiness, it definitely might be time to ease up. Now, in the instance that you want more muscle, maybe you like aspects of your physique, but deep down inside, you want to have more curves even at a lower body fat percentage. This is a great opportunity to challenge yourself, get out of your comfort zone, and spend time in an intentional growth phase. And last question, does stopping a deficit mean I'll balloon up? No, not necessarily. If you are consistent with food reporting and you know the amount that you're going to increase from wherever you're at in your current deficit, it should be a pretty linear progression. And if you're in a deficit, that by definition means that you're losing weight. So if you come up to a maintenance, that by definition should mean that we're not necessarily gaining weight, but I would also be mindful that you're taking this into account in being able to distill out what weight fluctuations you're experiencing and discern whether or not this is actually weight fluctuation or whether it's body fat gain, which I have a video specifically on this. weight fluctuation or hormonal imbalance, where I go into all of the aspects that can be contributing to daily weight fluctuations of 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 pounds. As you add in carbs, you're going to find that scale weight does go up. For every 1 gram of carb that you ingest, you're going to store 3 to 4 grams of water. And for individuals who are very sensitive to scale weight, this can be a little scary, but often you'll see more of that glycogen weight come back pretty immediately, and that's normal. Really, if you're structured with more of a reverse dieting approach, if it's appropriate for your phase and for your body fat, simply leveling out your intake is going to keep things pretty smooth. And with all this being said, this is going to be predicated on a high degree of adherence and food reporting. You guys, if you identify with any of these people or any of these situations, definitely consider hitting pause on the deficit, or at least do me a favor and reflect on if you would actually benefit from that. I'd recommend focusing on fueling your body, training effectively, and seeing how you flourish when you're not constantly depleted. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember, it's okay to step out of this dietary cycle and prioritize a healthier and more sustainable approach. As always, thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one.